I'm Margaret Brennan. I'm the chairperson of the Joint Labor Council and the president of IUFA. This is the end, actually, of the first set of meetings that we're going to be having around the system. We have been holding the meetings for the last 2 weeks. This is actually our 13th meeting. They're preliminary meetings to give you as much information as possible on what has occurred in the last month or so. I know all of you probably have read the bulletins and in the press about the proposal put to the Board of Directors. It happened very fast, and I know that there was a gap there of information for all of the memberships, so we wanted to come out to you and explain exactly what it is we've done. We also wanted to have an opportunity to introduce you to our advisors, the professional experts we have hired for the Labor Council project. With us today we have Wilbur Ross, the Managing Director of Rothschild, Inc., and Mike Connery from the corporate legal firm of Skadden Arps, Slate, Marr, and Flom. Also representing the unions, we have Errol Johnstad, the MEC chairman from Pan Am, and George Miranda representing the IBT, and also today Hank Duffy, the president of the ALPA. The FEIA is not represented today only because John Budd, the president of FEIA, had business on the West Coast and was unable to make this meeting. He has been with us at all the other meetings. Before we go into the details of the proposal and the financial structure, the financial data that got us there, to get it in perspective, you really have to look back at Pan Am and what's happened in the last several years. And starting with 1980, although before that Pan Am was in financial trouble, but starting only with 1980, I think everybody in this room can remember that is when we started the constant year after year financial crisis. In 81, 82, we all gave back 10% of our pay. In 83, we gave back again because there was another major crisis. In 84, the pensions were frozen and negotiations started. That's when we started hearing the famous shrink or grow theme from the company during negotiations. And in 1985, 4 contracts were concluded that were highly concessionary. Shortly thereafter, however, the last piece of asset selling dropped, and that was the sale of the Pacific. As you'll recall, the Intercontinental hotels had previously been sold, as had the Pan Am building. When they sold the Pacific, they got $750 million. Now, all of our concessions throughout all of these years, all of the employee sacrifices, were really made out of good faith of the employees on the promises from management that we would have growth, profitability, and job security with our employer. When they sold the Pacific, they received, as I said, $750 million. Here we are, barely a year later, after they received that money, and the money is pretty much gone. And we're saying, where is the money? Well, they're going to report for 1986 over $400 million in losses. They also used a lot of the money to buy subsidiaries. They bought Ransom, they bought Tempelhof, they bought the shuttle is an excellent example. They put money into the shuttle after they purchased it by rebuilding the Marine Air Terminal, rebuilding the gates in Boston and here in Washington. All of that money came from the Pacific Division sale, went into a subsidiary that now you read is on the selling block. And when they sell that, if they do, the proceeds from that sale will not go back to Airways. It will go to our greatest menace, which is the holding company. We looked at that. We also looked at the consolidation that's happening everywhere in this industry and what it has done to the employee groups. No employee has really come out well in any merger that's happened. Everybody is always, the employee groups are always the last consideration in mergers and acquisitions. Corporate concerns come first. We put those two pieces together, the consolidation dangers and the financial troubles of this company, and we decided we would like to try to do something different for our groups. So in November, the Labor Council unanimously passed a resolution. The resolution had 2 goals. One, make Pan Am viable and strong on its own so that it could attract a decent merger partner if that were to happen. Barring that we would go out and try to attract our own merger partner so that we would be able to reach our goals of job security for everybody on the property. After that resolution was passed in November, we started a cooperative effort with management to look at the financial structure and the operations of the company. During the process, we determined we needed professional expert advice, and we went out and interviewed several investment banking firms and determined that we wanted to hire Rothschild. Excuse me. It was at that point in time that the TWU decided they did not want to participate in that part of the project. They did not want to go to the expense and didn't feel that it was necessary. So from that point on, it was basically the 4 participating unions, which is the phrase that you hear now. We wish it was 5, but it was 4 starting at that point in time. When we finished the financial analysis with the assistance of Rothschild and the company's cooperation, we saw some numbers that showed this company was not only in trouble, this company was in great danger, and so were we. We also had read an article in the New York Times, and you probably all have read it. If you haven't, we have extra copies here tonight, called Pan Am's Disappearing Act. It was chiefly an interview with Chairman Acker, and we felt it did not contain enough denials that Pan Am's plan was not to dismantle the airline. Dismantling the airline, selling it off division by division, route by route, would be absolutely the worst thing that could happen to the employee groups, regardless of what employee group we're talking about. We don't believe that if that situation occurred, employees would go with the deal. We would most likely be out on the street, and someone would have a real nice set of routes and some Heathrow landing rights that everybody would like to have. But we would end up with nothing. Those 2 things led us to think that time was absolutely of the essence. We had to do something as fast as we could. We had to do something before the February Board of Directors meeting. We called a meeting in New York of the governing bodies of all 4 unions involved. A proposal that was put together by Rothschild with the input of the unions was put to these governing bodies. It was approved by all 4. And the evening of the 29th of January, we presented it to Acker and other top management members. We had wanted to present it personally to the Board of Directors. However, management would not allow us that right. Management was, to say the least, not enthused over the package. It contained several things that they found outrageous. They told us that they would study it but would not present it to the board the following week. So we took the next step, which was putting the concept of our proposal into a 3-page letter, which was delivered to each individual board of director. The day after the board of directors meeting, as you all know, it was roundly rejected in total by the board with very little explanation. We then entered the next stage of our process, which was to seek a qualified buyer or partner who would provide to us what we felt we needed for all the employees, and that was job security and protection. We had also at that time hired Skadden Arps as a corporate, for their corporate legal expertise to assist us in the project. I will say just a couple of things about the proposal, and then I will have Wilbur go through the numbers with you, and he will explain why we proposed it and how we got to the point we did. But there are a few misconceptions. First thing is, yes, it did contain an offer of concessions. However, that offer of concessions was contained as part of several other pieces of the proposal. It was not something that could just be taken out of context and agreed to without the other parts. It also was not a proposal that would go for control of the company nor control of the board of directors. Management has characterized it that way in the press and in the letters that they have written to the employees, and that is absolutely erroneous. It did not have that goal in mind, and it was not part of the proposal. All we felt that we needed was a stake and a greater piece of equity in this company. If we were going to make sacrifices, everybody was, and everyone should get something in return for it. So with that as a background to to the proposal itself, I'll ask Wilbur Ross to please explain to you the details of the proposal and the numbers.
Bill is handing out to you a one-page document printed on 2 sides, which we'll have to refer to help you understand the nature of the situation. You note that the front of it is labeled $150 million Pan American World Airways, Inc., and then down at the bottom, Merrill Lynch Capital Markets. That is the cover page from the prospectus that Pan Am issued to the public when it was trying to sell the $150 million of bonds last November and December. That offering failed, but this is the front cover of it, and the back page, which is what we will really be using in the discussion. The back page contains numbers which Pan American put forward to the public. These are Pan Am numbers. We haven't changed any of them. We haven't editorialized on them. They're the numbers put forward by Pan Am to the public. Does everyone have a sheet? Okay. If you turn to the back of it, please, where it's labeled Summary of Selected Operating and Balance Sheet Information, and then go to the first section under that, which is called Operating Information. You'll see that the first line there is total revenues. Total revenues or total sales, the total that comes in the door. Look all the way over, if you will, to the extreme right-hand column on that first line under the year 1981. In that year, Pan American World Airways had $3,512,000,000 of revenues. From 1981 till the present, most airlines have grown by 50 or 100%. So most airlines that had had $3.5 billion of revenues in 1981 by now would have $5 to $7 billion of revenues, because air travel has grown and people have added routes and all that. Look at Pan Am's actual experience. Go from 81 to 82, down. Go from 82 to 83, no real growth. 84, down from 83. 85, down a lot from 84. The 9 months of September 30, 86, down from 85. That period, of course, includes Pacific for 85 and not for 86. And some of the earlier part includes businesses that have been since transferred to the holding company. Nonetheless, the important point is Pan Am has been shrinking over those years. It has not been growing. If Pan Am had grown and did have $5 to $7 billion of revenues right now, the chances are we wouldn't be needing to have these kinds of meetings. It's not your job to make the airline grow. That's management's responsibility, to make the business plan, to make the operating plan, to make the route decisions, to make the scheduling decisions, so that you can have a healthy and growing company. This company has not grown. That creates a real problem, and it's one of the reasons why management has been saying that labor costs are too high. When a company shrinks rather than grows, what happens is the workforce gradually gets older, becomes more senior, because you don't have a lot of new young people coming in at the bottom. If you were growing more instead of shrinking, there'd be a lot more young people coming in at the bottom, so the average cost would be lower than it is now. And therefore, part of the cost problem that management speaks about is in effect a self-inflicted wound, because by shrinking rather than growing, they've compounded the problem of cost. The end result of the shrinkage and of various other phenomena you can see in the next 2 lines, operating income or loss and net income or loss. Wherever you see brackets or parentheses around the figures, that means losses. Look across those lines from 81 all the way out until the present. Pretty much all of them have brackets around them. That means pretty much in all the periods there have been losses. Look here in 1981, Pan Am, if you look in that lower right-hand figure in that second section, Pan Am had $786,700,000 of net worth. Since then, follow it across, gradually down, gradually down, gradually down. Now look at the last line, September 30, 1986. Now the net worth, the stockholder equity, is only $2,177,000. The losses during the period from 1981 through September 30, 86 amount to $784 million, even with the gains on sales of items. That's an awful lot of money for anyone to lose. The problem with it is not just the fact of the losses, but the financial condition that it has left the company in. Because that $2,177,000 of stockholder equity at September had to support $1,800,000,000 of debts, of liabilities. It gets worse, unfortunately. By the statement made by Chairman Acker to the press regarding the results for the fourth quarter, the 3 months, October, November, and December. By his indication, the losses must have been well in excess of $100 million during that period. That means at December, the little $2 million of stockholder equity that had been there in September was gone. And instead, as of December, your company had more liabilities than it had assets, to the tune of more than $100 million. Gets worse yet, unfortunately, again. During the present 3-month period, January, February, March of 87, chances are that the airway lost another $100 or more million. As a result of that, as we sit here, the airline is probably about $200 million in the hole, has about $200 million more liabilities than it has assets. Those numbers do not even include all of the pension liabilities that exist. The Pan Am balance sheet as of September reflected somewhat over $200 million of the unfunded pension liabilities. There are an additional $400+ million not yet reflected on the balance sheet, just in footnotes to it. So, in reality, the debts are really more like $2,200,000,000, and the negative net worth, the insufficiency, is hundreds of millions of dollars. This situation is obviously not something that can continue in exactly that form for any great length of time. It has gotten to the point, in fact, where the net worth on a balance sheet basis of not only the airline, because this is just Pan American World Airways that we're referring to, but also as of March 31st, the chances are that the holding company, when combined with the airline, probably on a combined basis, also won't have net worth left. It was this sequence of facts that led the Joint Labor Council to call the very quick meeting of its governing boards of the constituent unions to say, we must do something to stench the bleeding. We must do something to stabilize the situation. And we must do something promptly. And whether anyone else recognizes that there's a crisis here or not, your unions recognize that there is and are trying to do something about it. You can also see from the magnitude of the numbers that there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of grief that's going to have to be absorbed to correct this situation. Because the numbers are so big and are so frightening, we adopted the notion that there had to be pain sharing. that it couldn't be like the prior situations where the unionized part of the company made concessions and no one else did. During the period of your concessions, those top management people, including the chairman, whose contracts provided for it, actually got annual raises and bonuses during the period. You people made sacrifices, the rest of the company did not. So the first notion we advanced was that this time, if there were to be sacrifices by the unions, there had to be matching sacrifices by the non-union part, including junior management, including senior management, including the chief executive. Important for two reasons. One is obviously it's the fair way for things to be done, but even more important than that, the union payroll is somewhat over half of the total payroll. If your concessions are not matched by the non-union part of the company to achieve the same end result, you're going to have to give almost twice as much as if they match it. So it's important not just as a fundamental matter of fairness, it's also very important in terms of how deep a cut are we liable to have to take on ourselves. We also felt that the pain was sufficiently severe that it wasn't enough just to distribute it among the people who get their W-2s from the company. That indeed there were two other constituencies that needed to be part of the solution. One are the debt holders. A lot of the debt that Pan Am has naturally carries interest, some of it at very high rates, some as high as 15% interest rate. Very hard to make a profit when you're paying 15% interest on the money you've borrowed. So the next part of the plan was that some of the creditors would contribute to the solution by exchanging some of their high interest rate debts for stock in the company. You don't have to pay interest on the stock, and therefore it would be a cash savings to the company. A dollar saved of interest is just as helpful to the company as a dollar saved in wages. They're the same. So that was the third concept of pain sharing. The fourth concept was that the stockholders also needed to contribute to the solution. Because if they didn't, and if they didn't contribute in a very significant fashion, then when the company turned around, you would be left with the lower wages or longer hours or changed work rules, and they would reap the benefit as the stock went up. So the idea there was if the total concessions needed by all the employees, including management, were to be $600 million over the 3-year period, then half of that, or $300 million, had to be absorbed by the stockholders, and the other $300 million to come from the workers. Adding together the $300 million of new stock that you would get with the shares that you already have from the ESOP program of a few years ago would have meant that the workers in total would have had around a third of the stock in the company. So in that sense, a third of the concessions you'd be making would be made to yourselves, would come back to you. And that seemed like a fairly reasonable notion. The next concept, which these were already very troublesome concepts to the management, the next one you can appreciate was even more troublesome because the next one said, in any event, we believe that the company needs a new management. We believe that this record and these losses do not justify your making further concessions to the same management that you've made concessions to before. The concessions they made before you gave, and it didn't work. It wasn't executed properly. This time we feel, and your leaders feel, that concessions should not be made to the present management, but that there needs to be change in management. Beyond that, we felt that if the unions and the other workers were to have a third of the stock, having one representative on the board of directors was not enough. Having one person on the board under these circumstances really, at best, gives you a bit of a listening post, at best, gives you some feel for what's happening in the meetings. It gives you very limited capability to change decisions or to effect the decisions. Consequently, we suggested the creation of a new board with 15 persons on it. Of the 15 persons, 7 would be designated by the unions. 7, not 8. A minority, not a majority. Of the remaining 8 people, 1 would be the new chief executive officer. 3 would be carryover members from the present board, outside directors, so that there'd be some continuity. And 4 would be new people from outside who were jointly picked by the labor designees and the independent people on the board. That was the precise proposal that we made to the management. Now, I've made a lot of very precise statements here, and don't want you to go away with the notion that what we said to them was, here is a thing set in cement, here are commandments handed down from the mount, you must do every single thing to the penny. That's not the way that it was presented. Indeed, in the summary letter that Margaret Brennan wrote to the board, she said, we can well understand that there may be room for disagreement on some of the specific points, but we invited a dialogue, a discussion revolving around how to implement the fundamental concepts. And the fundamental concepts to us were pain sharing, a global solution, fixing up the balance sheet, including one proposal we had made was that they either sell or borrow money against world services and put that down into the airline so that it would have more net worth in the airline. In any event, they rejected it. And this may be one of the few times in history where unions, first of all, came forward and volunteered concessions to management. And I'm sure it's the first time in history where concessions were volunteered and refused. But because we were sufficiently alarmed by the financial analysis, which I ran you through in summary form, the JLC participating unions said, well, let's not stop here. If these people don't want to make an arrangement that we can live with, let us see if there's someone outside who would do so. Hopefully someone who was another airline, hopefully someone who could solve the problem of infusing new management talent, hopefully an airline that could bring more capital to the picture, and hopefully an airline that could address the problem of the need for feeder routes. But even if not an airline, even if in the first transaction we couldn't solve all of the problems, if at least we could solve the financial stability problem, and if at least we could solve the management problem, perhaps then later on we could solve the feeder problem. So the instructions that we have from your leaders are to search for merger partners, either within the airline industry or without it. In order to get this accomplished, and this is not an easy task, if this becomes accomplished, it probably will be the first time that such a venture has been tried, and it certainly will be the first time that it's succeeded. So I don't want to underestimate to you the difficulty of what your leaders are trying to accomplish. But I think the most important thing and the most important way in which each of you can contribute to the process, assuming that you're sympathetic toward it, is by making sure that your unions and hopefully eventually the TWU stick together. because the traditional pattern in labor relations is management negotiates with one union at a time. It keeps you in the little box labeled collective bargaining. It keeps you out of issues like management, out of issues like balance sheet, out of issues like pain sharing. Don't let them keep you out of those issues. Those are vital issues. If you don't stick together, there's a fair chance that what will happen to you is something close to what happened in the case of the Continental Airlines. My firm was involved in the Continental Airlines bankruptcy. It happens we represented the public bondholders in Continental, not the unions, but the public bondholders. The public bondholders were well organized, got themselves together early, had advisors, and at the end of the case, the public bondholders got back out the principal amount of the debt that they had lent to Continental. They got the interest that wasn't paid while it was in Chapter 11, and they even got interest on the unpaid interest. They were organized. Labor was not organized, was not out in front. Labor, well, you all know what happened to labor in Continental. The laws are now a little different, so I don't mean to imply that exactly the same thing will happen. But in the case of Continental, and in the case of a number of the airline mergers, the workers were the victims. They were mainly the victims because they didn't hang together, the unions were not organized helping each other, and as a result, they were not able to initiate action. They could only respond to the actions that were put forward by the boards and by the managements. If you're not on the offensive, if you're only on the defensive, the only question is how badly will you lose? The only way to win is to stick together, encourage your leaders not to let management split them apart, stay together, work together, and then we have a fighting chance. Otherwise, you'll be victimized. Thank you.
My name is Michael Connery. I'm from the firm of Skadden, Slate, Marr & Flom. As many of you may know, we are probably the premier merger and acquisition law firm in the country today. All of the deals you read about, the acquisitions of one company by another, we are invariably on one side or the other of those deals. As a result, you may wonder why I'm here today, and particularly why I'm here today on your behalf. The fact is very simple. We see you not terribly different from the way we see a corporate client. And that is, as the situation evolves, you will find that you are going to be either buyers or sellers in this situation. And I will explain to you briefly what I mean by that. What I will also do is explain the kind of role we will play on your behalf. And I think the easiest way to do that is to go over several scenarios that I think are likely to arise in this situation. These are situations I believe that you will have to encounter in the next weeks and months. The first scenario, and the one that is obviously most attractive, and that is that Pan Am will become the merger partner of another airline, a strong airline. Obviously, the attractiveness of this to all of you is that it provides job security. This may not be as easy as everyone once thought. There had been a lot of talk, for example, about American Airlines buying Pan Am. American, not to my surprise, has disclaimed any interest in buying all of Pan Am. American is clearly interested in some of Pan Am's assets. The people in this room are not among those assets. You're too senior, you're too well paid, your benefits are too high. And this is going to be a significant problem. If there are other merger partners for you, for the company, they are going to be interested in what you can do for them. In the most attractive situation, therefore, you will have more than one interested merger partner. That being the case, you are in a position, by offering concessions or inducements to one partner versus another, to attract someone who you feel most comfortable with and who you feel will serve the long-term best interest of the airline and its employees. That's what Wilbur is undertaking to do right now. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. I'm not as optimistic as some because of the way that Pan Am has been allowed to deteriorate. But that does remain probably the most attractive alternative. Let's go to the next scenario. The next scenario is very unattractive. And the next scenario is bankruptcy. And it's no less likely than the first scenario. I was involved in the Easton situation on behalf of the unions there. When I got involved in that situation, Easton was down to its last $200 million in cash. The board of directors decided at that time it had no choice but to sell the company or to put it into Chapter 11. Pan Am, in some respects, is worse off now than Easton was then. So you can draw your own conclusions about the likelihood of bankruptcy. In a bankruptcy situation, the management of the company becomes what is called a debtor in possession. In fact, that means it continues to run the company. Management then goes to the bankruptcy judge and argues before that judge what it needs to change in the way of your collective bargaining agreements in order to maintain viability. That's where we would get involved. We would go before that same bankruptcy judge on your behalf and argue that viability can be achieved other than taking everything from the employees, which invariably would be the case. And we're preparing right now to be ready to do that. In the Continental situation, management was able to come in and abrogate the collective bargaining agreements. That law has been changed. Now, as I said, the management would have to come in and argue before a bankruptcy judge and justify why it wanted to make the changes it wanted to make. But it will be able to make some changes. For those of you who have any illusions about bankruptcy, don't. Bankruptcy is not attractive. This is not a company, in my opinion, that can fly out of Chapter 11. As soon as there is a suggestion of Chapter 11, in fact, travel agents are going to leave you in droves. And I am confident that whatever emerged from Chapter 11 would have no resemblance to Pan Am as you know it today. That's the second scenario. It gets worse. The third scenario, and the one I think most likely, is a gradual or not so gradual dismemberment of the company. That certain assets would be sold, that employees would not, in all likelihood, accompany those assets. And what you're seeing right now, I think, in the industry is a waiting game being played on the part of a number of other carriers who are watching Pan Am, watching its deterioration, knowing that at some point in the future they can come in and bid on the assets that they want. As I said, you are not among those assets. The role we would play in that situation is that we would, on your behalf, attempt to argue in court that the sale of certain assets is not in the best interest of the company. What you do in a situation like that is you argue that the board of directors has what is called a fiduciary duty to its creditors and shareholders. And by making the particular move it was making was in the interest of short-term expediency and would not leave the carrier in a position where it could continue to operate, so that the carrier would no longer be of any value to anyone. That's the kind of legal case that we would make on your behalf in court. The other thing that would happen, given the dismemberment scenario, is that you would have to be prepared at that point to come in and be your own buyers of last resort, either collectively with the other employee groups or ideally with the strong outside investor who would make a capital infusion into the company. The employees at Eastern considered being their own buyers of last resort. The problem was they did it a year too late. If you're going to be a buyer of last resort, you have to be a buyer when the company's for sale. And as I said, you may find yourselves in a situation where you're given a choice of this management deciding to sell pieces of the company without the employees accompanying those pieces, sell to a buyer that is not attractive to you, or being your own buyer of last resort. This is not the primary thing that you should take away from my presentation today, but you have to start to think in those terms. And as I said, we would work on your behalf to accomplish that objective if you decide that that's the only way to go. One of the areas that's particularly significant today in the law is the whole question of officer and director liability. It's an extremely unsettled area of the law. Directors are concerned about being sued. They're concerned about losing their homes. They're concerned about losing whatever assets they've built up over their careers. As a result, they become very, very sensitive to any criticism of their conduct. This is going to work to your advantage and to your disadvantage. It's going to work to your disadvantage because, being human, a board of directors is going to look at an opportunity to avoid personal liability. So that when Frank Lorenzo came in and bought Eastern Airlines, it was not a coincidence that the last thing that he did in order to buy Eastern Airlines was to indemnify the board of directors. Some other buyer comes in and is prepared to do the same thing. This board of directors will do the same thing. Okay, now, that's how it works to your disadvantage. It's going to work to your advantage because if you choose to be buyers of last resort, that same board has to take your offer every bit as seriously as any other offer. Overlying all of this is the whole question of litigation. Litigation, as you know, means going into court and suing. This is the kind of thing that would arise offensively, as I said, where you would try to keep the company from doing something that you did not think was in the long-term best interest of the company or in the interest of the employees, such as selling a particular asset that would destroy the viability of the company. Litigation also arises in a defensive context. If the union leaders are sued for some course of action they have chosen, we would be working on behalf of them to defend them. I think that's unlikely. So, just looking at each of those scenarios, you can see that as the situation unfolds, you're going to find yourselves in a position of either being a seller, and that is you're going to be selling your services to the highest bidder or the bidder that you can make the best deal with, or you're going to be a buyer. You're going to be buying this company because you've decided that it's a last resort for you. Let me mention two things. One, time. You don't have a lot. This is a course of action that should have been embarked upon years ago. It is only human nature, however, that people don't see the reality of the situation until it confronts them. You are confronted with the realities of this situation. This situation has deteriorated to such an extent that I don't see that there's any other course of action except the one that's been outlined here today. You've got to move down that road. You've got to do it promptly. Recognize that this group is the repository right now of creative thinking in this area. If there's a solution, it's going to come out of this group. They deserve your support. And that's the other theme. You've got to be together. If you're not together, then you're neither a buyer nor a seller. And you might as well get out the Washington Post and start looking in the want ads. Because that's where the situation is. Work together, support your leaders, and maybe you've got a chance. Probably less than 50-50. It is very clear to me, however, if you don't stick together, the likelihood of failure is 100%. We'll do what we can. You have to do what you can. Thank you.
On behalf of the IUFA, I want to say that our executive board is unanimous in its support of this course we're embarked on. We see it as a course, the only course we can take, and we refuse to be bystanders. We are not going to wait to see what happens, to see if maybe we will be protected. We feel very strongly we will not be protected by this management. They will not look out for our concerns. There are enough flight attendant victims in the industry right now, and we don't want to be another group. We believe very strongly that this is probably the most solid coalition that has happened on our property ever. We wish it was 5 unions. Right now it's only 4. However, maybe it will be 5 later, and that is our hope. However, the group in front of you is totally supportive of each other, and we have received really nothing but support from the people who have been to our meetings and understand exactly what it is we're about. That's very important to all of us because we have to know that you care as much as we do and that you feel we're on the right course here. At this time, I'm going to ask, I guess, Errol first on behalf of ALPA Pan Am, and then Henry Duffy will speak after Errol.
Thank you, Margaret. You and I didn't need Wilbur Ross to tell us what's happening to this airline. You and I didn't need Michael Connery to tell us what's happening to the airline because we've been watching it. Exclusive of the shuttle at National Airport, how many flights are left? 4 a day. What happened to the other 25 or so that we used to have? What happened to all those flights to all those cities along the East Coast that we used to have? With the exception of Tampa, Orlando, and Miami, what happened to all those flights all over Florida that we used to have? What happened to the west coast of Africa? What happened to South Africa? What happened to Hawaii? What happened to the Pacific? What happened around the world? We got a letter from Messrs. Chagru and Acker. It's kind of interesting because on February 3rd, Mr. Crandall sent a letter to his employees, large blocks of text of which are synonymous. So it appears that the speechwriters work in all camps. Two things caught my attention. One was that there is a plan, and two is that there's a new management team taking over, ready to lead us to profitability. Now, as to the plan was presented to the board of directors on the first Tuesday of December. They didn't approve it then. It was revised and sent to the board of directors on the first Tuesday of January. They didn't approve it then. It was revised and sent to the board of directors on the first Tuesday of February. They didn't approve it then. And next Tuesday, another revision goes back to the board of directors. Now, as to the team that's been in charge of this airline for the 5 years that was described in the company's own material that they sent out in a statement to the financial community and to prospective buyers of the Merrill Lynch bonds. It appears to me that the team is the same team that's been here for 5 years. Now, there have been some exceptions. In the last year and a half, Tony McKinnon came on board as Senior Vice President of Marketing. He left last month, went to American Airlines. Edgar Lane was brought in to be in charge of data, electronic sharing, bring on the new Sabre system. He left and went to Texas International. Yesterday, the Vice President of Flight Operations called me and said, "It's my last day. I'm going to Flying Tiger." Following Ron Marasco, Vice President of Maintenance, who went to Flying Tiger before. So the new team seems to be going the other way. The Wall Street Journal said that Tony McKinnon looked at the financial viability of American Airlines and of Pan Am and made a career choice. The courage that you display in the next few weeks is going to determine your career choice. Attempts have been made to circumvent the leadership of the labor unions, to go directly around them to certain members of their boards, to divide up the labor unions and to take one away from the rest of the group. They've all failed. We're either going to have to cover each other's tails, or we are going to be slitting each other's throats. Now, the Joint Labor Coalition has the initiative. We went out and found an investment banker, Rothschild. We went out and found a merger and acquisition attorney in the firm of Skadden Arp. We're out front. We are the first to provide for a financial restructuring of the company at the time when the board of directors is failing to approve management's plan. We have an alternative in place for bankruptcy. We have plans for a marriage with another company. We have plans for a buyout as a purchase of last resort. We are prepared. The pilots are in federal court in New York. It's not a particularly strong case, but we will make the point that whenever employees are threatened, whenever our scope is threatened, we're going to fight. There are non-union flight crews already hired and in place, designated to do the shuttle certification. John Blankenship is the FAA inspector who has reviewed all of their resumes and approved them as being qualified. Management is considering all of its options. In the 5 years that current management has run this company, it has mismanaged it to the tune of thousands of dollars and nearly $1 billion loss in shareholder equity. Now we have to seize the moment, and this is the only moment that's left. This is our company. We are Pan Am. President Duffy?
You've heard some pretty scary stuff, tough words, liquidation, bankruptcy, mergers, all of those things that employees don't like to hear. Let me just tell you that in this deregulated industry, I've been to far too many of these meetings. They're far too commonplace. But let me tell you that we've learned some lessons along the way. And Mike Connery referred to some of them, and that is we tried to take this on individually as individual unions occasionally, and occasionally we tried to take each other on, union against unions. And we found out that we got eaten up in that process. What you are doing is the way to take on this problem. Nobody's saying it isn't a tough problem, but what you're doing is the intelligent way to deal with it. Now, if this company chooses to sell the shuttle, then I think it confirms our suspicion that they're liquidating. If they choose to retain a piece of the shuttle, then I think it confirms our suspicion that they're trying to break the unions. But in any of those events, I want to reconfirm what Earl said. You are Pan Am, not some bottom line management that knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing. You are Pan American. And it's the thing that all of us in this industry are learning. We built these airlines up. We're the ones that made them what they are. And now we're being traded out there on the market with no concern for the people that invested this human effort into it. And so it's come down to looking out for ourselves and looking out for our families and being sure that we band together to take this thing on as a unit. What I pledge to you from the International of the Airline Pilots Association through our local unit is that we'll give you the legislative support and the regulatory support and the financial help to make sure that we come out the other end of this still as Pan American and still as an employee group that's stuck together and made the best of our future together. Thank you.
I guess you heard some pretty scary stuff today, and like Margaret said to you earlier, we've been on this road show. It's not a pleasant situation, but I thought it's important that we at least regroup and take a look at exactly where we've been and where this company has been over the years. I see a lot of senior people here over the years, a lot of people who have a lot of vested time, especially at a station like Washington, D.C. and Dulles and the Res office out here. But I know we all received recently a letter from Chagru and a letter from Acker. And one important thing just jumped out of the page at me. I mean, it just absolutely just came right out. That he, Acker and Chagru, are under a mandate from the board of directors to turn a profit in 1987. Where have they been up till now? Why 87? What happened to 86, 85, 84? And you heard Wilbur Ross. This company has lost over the last 5, 6 years over $2 billion. Now, a lot of people don't relate to $2 billion, but just think about $2,000 million. That's enough to make millionaires out of everybody in this room, including their family. It's mind-boggling. Acker comes on board, probably in 1981, and he turns around, and the first thing that he does is cut the commissions. Well, that doesn't sound too bad, except if you knew the airline industry, you'll understand that 75% of Pan American's revenue come from travel agents. Now, you think you just endeared yourself to them when you say, I'm going to cut your commissions? Nope, major mistake. Then came the beauty. Here comes a good one for you. Well, the people who are going to redeem their World Pass, remember the World Pass redemption? Well, we're going to turn around and redeem them at our peak of our summer. So we were flying everybody to Europe free. But we redeemed the World Pass. They used up their credit. So now it's wiped out, except you were flying them for nothing. That was another super mistake. So if you looked at all of these deals that were made over the years, and then you come up to the most recent one, where they turned around and they sold the Pacific on February 1985, when the discussions were taking place and the TW was ready to go out on strike, they forced them out. And they forced them out for one particular reason. United Airlines did not want the commissary in Honolulu and San Francisco. All of a sudden, they didn't need you anymore. They didn't need the concessions that we made back in 1981 that everybody remembers when they came to the unions and said they needed, they were bleeding. And we led the way. We led the extension also. We are committed that this corporation will no longer get concessions except on our terms. And there's got to be some quid pro quos for all the sacrifices that all the loyal employees over the years have made to this company. I just want to leave you here with one message, that as far as the position of the Teamsters organization is concerned, we are fully behind Margaret Brennan. She's doing an outstanding job as chairperson of the Joint Labor Council. Mike Connery, Scadden Ops, Wilbur Ross with Rothschild, our advisors, as well as all the unions. We are committed to you. We are committed to secure your pensions. Any concessions have to be tied into LPPs, and we're committed to protect everybody's job whatsoever. As far as we're concerned, I need you, we need you, you need us. And if we move forward together, we will accomplish everything that we set out to accomplish, which is job security, secure the pensions, and LPPs for everybody. Thank you.